afternoon and welcome to today's presentation, Patent Litigation from an Expert's Point of View. In today's webinar, Dr. Direen will discuss patents, product analysis and reverse engineering, plaintiff and defense side notes, non-testifying consultants, depositions, court testimony. To give you a little background about our presenter, Dr. Harry Direen has more than 30 years of experience as an engineer designing and developing products in the electronics and software industry. He has worked in areas of control systems, embedded systems design and development, control of UAVs, drones, product reverse engineering, and as a testifying expert in patent infringement cases. Attendees who require a passcode, the word for today is patent. During the Q&A session, we ask that you enter this passcode into the Q&A widget for CLE reporting purposes. The Q&A is located to the left of your screen. Please remember that if you're applying for CLE credit, you must log onto your computer as yourself and stay on for the full 60 minutes. You are also required to complete the survey at the end of the program. Please note that the CLE credit cannot be given to those watching together on a single computer. Tomorrow morning, we will send out an email with a link to the archive recording of the webinar. The slides can be downloaded from the resource list to the left of your screen. Also, Dr. Direen will be answering your questions throughout the presentation, so if you have a question, please enter it in the Q&A section, and he will answer it as soon as possible. Thank you for attending today, and Dr. Direen, the presentation is now turned over to you.
Thank you, Rochelle. As Rochelle said, I'm Dr. Harry Direen. Direen Tech's a consulting company. We're currently involved in research with unmanned aerial vehicles, primarily with the U.S. Air Force Academy. Along with this, Direen Tech is involved in product reverse engineering and expert witness services for patent infringement cases. To start off with, I'll give you my disclaimer. I'm an engineer. I'm not an attorney. So as the title suggests, this presentation is from an engineer or my perspective. I've been working with patent attorneys for several years now, and I have a great deal of experience for you guys, but I don't think it's a job I could do. I'm an engineer at heart. I'm not an attorney. As Rochelle mentioned, I'd like to keep this presentation a little bit of a more of a dialogue than just simply a monologue with you guys just listening to me. So anytime you have questions, please shoot them across, and I'll try to answer them as we go along rather than just having a couple of question and answer periods. Okay, so let's jump in. Let's see, is the screen coming up there, Rochelle? I'm not seeing the next one pop in. Let me see. Here we go. Okay, what is a patent? Now, I'm quite aware of, as you as attorneys, patent attorneys specifically, know very well what a patent is. I bring this question up not because you don't understand the question, but just to kind of help you recognize that that area that you're most familiar with, the rest of the world is pretty fuzzy on. On my first trial, and I had been kind of working with patents and product reverse engineering for over 10 years at this point. As I get ready for my first trial, the attorney I was working with kind of asked me the question, you know, what is a patent? How would I explain that to a jury? And it kind of stopped me dead in my tracks. And I was working with patents, thinking about them as describing an invention. How does that invention, or some product possibly infringe upon this invention? How does the patent describe an invention? But I really wasn't thinking about a patent as really being a set of property rights. So that's probably one of the first misconceptions you start running across is, a patent's not so much, it describes an invention, but what it really is a set of property rights. And as you're working with experts in their fields, most of them probably are not attorneys, do not have a patent attorney background. They may have worked with patents, but it's not necessarily going to be clear to them that, what a patent really is a set of property rights. And certainly by the time we get to the trial and with juries, they're not going to understand either. So be prepared at any point in time with your audience to kind of help clarify their understanding of patents. Another big area from an engineer or scientist point of view. The first time we take a look at a set of patent claims, and the first couple of products I had patented, and I looked at patent claims, and I go, what in the world? That is the most convoluted, horrible way of describing my invention. And the problem was really engineers and scientists are rarely introduced or taught how to read a patent claim. And what is not really understood or clearly described is that, patent claims are not a description of an invention. What they really are, and as you understand well, they're really describing the boundaries of an invention. And so the claim language is very specific for that area. This diagram, excuse me, I've got to switch over online here to this diagram or this slide that I just brought up. If you look at it, it happens to be the legal description of my property. Now that's the last thing I would kind of pass to someone or a friend saying, come visit me for a cookout. Here's the legal description of my property. But it becomes very important if there's a dispute over the boundaries of my property. And, when we're working with patent infringement cases, basically where the disputes are, where the issues are, kind of come down to the patent claims and what the boundaries of the invention are. Engineers and scientists are kind of well trained in mathematics, so we understand the boundaries description, we understand Venn diagrams, set theory, so we understand very clearly, the relationship of, set containment. So it becomes easy for us to understand, a relationship between an independent claim and dependent claims. But that's not necessarily your experts or the people you're working with are not going to understand that necessarily up front. So you want to be there helping them along that process to understand what patent claims really are, a description of the boundaries of a invention. So, as I said, it's really the patent claims when we get to patent infringement cases are the battlegrounds. They're really they're the definition of the key battlegrounds. And this becomes kind of a two-way street when you're working with experts. One, you want to use your experts to help in the patent claim construction to understand what those boundaries are and how they would fit, especially with products that you're looking at. And you want to help work with the expert to make sure he's understanding the nuances of the claim language so that you're getting those boundaries well defined as you're going through and looking at a product. Because basically that's what your expert's going to be doing. He's going to be trying to determine whether a product at hand is operating within the bounds of these particular patent and patent claims. So in this next slide, we're kind of getting into where your expert really has his expertise and where they come into play. And that's usually in terms of the product analysis and product reverse engineering to determine whether a given product is infringing the patent at hand. This is where I'm certainly most comfortable and what I've been involved with for quite a few years now. But it does take special skills that are developed that not every engineer or scientist has up front. When you start looking at a product, there's a lot of elements to a product. This particular one I'm showing here happens to be a Coriolis flow meter, and it has mechanical elements. There's vibrating tubes associated with it. There's electronic circuitry associated with it, and there's a lot of embedded software associated with the product. And this particular patent and product I'd worked with a few years ago had all of these elements. And so to do product analysis and reverse engineering against a patent, you really kind of had to understand all the different elements that were involved and then how they related to the patent, because you're not trying to understand necessarily all the details of how a product works. What you're trying to understand is and get at is how the operation of that product is working relative to the specific invention or patent or patents involved. This particular product was very challenging to reverse engineer because of the level of components. The patent claims did cover elements that were in the electronic side of the fence, the actual electronic hardware, and they had key elements that were tied up in the embedded firmware of the system. So we literally had to pull the firmware chip off the device, dump the bytes from that firmware, disassemble that firmware, and then do a complete analysis of that firmware as how key elements were operating. This next slide shows some of the schematic level reverse engineering we did to understand the circuitry that was going on in the front end. And then this next slide goes through and shows some of the software reverse engineering. It was literally reverse engineered from looking at assembly code, which if you look on the left-hand side of this, you see just hexadecimal numbers. That's what comes out of the flash memory on the device. In more of the middle column are assembly level instructions. So a disassembler will convert the numbers on the left to assembly code, and then from there you start kind of carefully working through the assembly code and try to figure out the overall algorithms and the process that is working within here. And eventually I got this down to the block diagram of the flow meter's operation on the bottom right-hand side of this system. And from there, was able to go back and compare that operation with the claims in the patent and demonstrate that the operation of the product is operating within the bounds of the patent claims. Let's see, I'm just double. So the product reverse engineering process, depending on the patent and the product at hand, can go from fairly straightforward. A lot of times the patents are what I'd call fairly observable claims, so that you can look at a product's operations basically from the operational manuals and the operational aspects of the product and determine whether or not it's operating within the patent claims, within the bounds of them. In a product like this and the detail levels of the patent claims, there was a very substantial reverse engineering process to get down and determine whether or not this product was infringing the patent claims. Okay, so let's continue on. So some of the key questions that as you're going through doing product reverse engineering is certainly, does the product actually infringe the patent claims? I know this is a very obvious question, but it really is the key battlegrounds in any patent infringement case. And this then starts getting into how clear are the boundaries of the patent claims. It gets into the claim construction language. And, what you really want to know and understand is how close to the boundaries is this product operating. I've been through this process, quite a few times, and you find that, usually, for instance, in this case, a flow meter, the primary elements of the claim are, is it a Coriolis flow meter? Yes. Does it have a lot of the key aspects for the product that you're looking at? Does it have pick-off sensors? Does it have, the vibrating tubes? Well, it's a flow meter that's in this category. So it has, you go through the patent claims, it has, 80 to 90% of the pieces of patent claims just are almost fallouts because it's a Coriolis flow meter and the patent is dealing with, in this case, a Coriolis flow meter. It then kind of gets down into very specifics of the claim elements of, does the underlying algorithms used within the patent claims, are those being used and are you operating within those boundaries? And as you're working with experts, you're constantly kind of going back and forth, making sure you understand what those boundaries are and whether the product is operating inside the boundaries. I know personally, as I start going through new products and looking at these things, You can often go through the claims and say, well, yeah, here's all the claim elements that, it's going to fit just because it's a Coriolis flow meter. What are the elements that I'm going to struggle with? What are the pieces that I have to really go look for? What is the aspects of the reverse engineering effort you're going to have to do to go drive down to the key elements of the claim that describe the key aspects of the invention and how well do they fit. And I quite often approach the reverse engineering process looking first for what are the key elements that I'm going to struggle with, and can I prove whether the product is operating within the bounds of those elements or not. Quite frankly, it's usually easier to prove a product's operating clearly outside the bounds of an element than it is to show that it is operating within the bounds of an element. If you can show that it's operating outside of the bounds of the claim elements, then you're basically terminating your process a lot sooner, but it's better from really kind of ends up better from everybody's standpoint because you get to that decision as quickly as possible. Okay. So looking at this from the plaintiff's side, which is quite often the side I've been involved in, you want to make sure that the infringement is on solid grounds. As we go through that reverse engineering process, the analysis of the product, we want to make sure that that the product is operating clearly within the bounds of the patent claims, and identify early on as much as possible which elements, claim elements, that you're going to be struggling with, where you're operating kind of close to the boundaries. It's those places where you're starting to kick back and forth and understand, well, minor changes in claim interpretation drive the product outside the bounds of infringement, or their claim construction language that has to be kind of worked out to make sure that the product is going to remain operating within the bounds of the claim elements. You really want to make sure as you're working with your experts, that you're identifying any areas, any claim elements where he's kind of dancing around, where the product may be kind of dancing around the boundaries of a claim element. And sometimes that can be, as you're working together, you can kind of shore up those areas where you're operating close to the boundaries. On the defense side, and I actually kind of, in these next few slides, and want to start opening up the questions because in part, we're kind of getting into an area that I'm a little, would like to ask the audience about a little bit more, is on the defense side, if someone's coming after my product saying it infringes a patent, I understand that the proof of the burden lies with the plaintiff. They have to clearly demonstrate that the product is operating within the bounds of patent claims. But on the defense side, you actually have an advantage from the manufacturer of a product standpoint. He's got the engineering resources to say, oh, okay, we know exactly how a product is operating, how it works. We designed this product. So we know all the details that are not going to be available or readily available to the plaintiff side and the expert on his side, because he's basically having to work with in less than ideal conditions. He doesn't have necessarily all the schematics. He doesn't have the source code to start off with. He doesn't have access to the the design engineers to interpret how design works. Whereas on the defense side, an expert or you can bring in a person to help compare a product's operation to the patent claims, and hopefully be able to demonstrate from the defense side that the product is not operating within the bounds of the claims. So from the defense side, if the product does not infringe, then a solid defense can be built. If the product does appear to infringe, then at least you can start kind of coming back down to say, what are the consequences of infringement? Is this patent that's coming against me, is it, fundamental to my product's operation? Is it incidental? How much, is my product market relying upon the, the technology that's coming against me? Are there primary markets where, versions of the product do not infringe? These are the types of questions that you're trying to pull out. I believe, from your standpoint, from the patent attorney's standpoint, you really understand this. But it's been my experience kind of working from the plaintiff side, but kind of watching the defense side, saying it seems to me quite often they've been weak in defending their own product in terms of really kind of coming back down and getting an expert to help dig through the details of their product's operation relative to the patent claim. And building a good defense really from the aspect that the expert on that side should have far more advantage to access to the engineers that develop the product and understanding of the product for determining exactly why the product does not, which claim elements the product is operating outside of. So this really kind of starts bringing up my question. I'd like to kind of go into this first question and answer period with and get some feedback from you as attorneys working on this case. Is I understand that you may not want to use your testifying expert to go through and do a complete analysis of the defense side's product, because if he, you may not want him to know or understand exactly how deep, the product infringes or does not infringe. Well, certainly if it does not infringe, you want him to know that. If it does infringe, I'm not exactly sure what you want him to know so that he can be the best defense on the stand. So what are the legal ramifications of using, say, a non-testifying consultant to come in and do the essentially product reverse engineering process and look to determine how a particular product is or is not infringing? And it takes a person that has background and experience in this area to compare a product's operation with, with patent claims. That's not something that every engineer has experience in. You can't rely on the engineers at the company of the product that's being accused of infringement. So my question really is, as we go into this question and answer period, I'd like to hear from you, is how can you use non-testifying consultants on the defense side? So can we go ahead and open this up to questions at this point in time?
Sure. If all of the attendees can enter the passcode. And our first question, are some of the more difficult products you have reverse engineered?
Well, certainly that flow meter was a very challenging product, but I've also reverse engineered the audio signal compression algorithms in media players that had to go back down to assembly level code and reverse engineer those. Did another product where we were looking for a specific compression algorithm in audio products, and we didn't have access to source code or anything, but had to just look at the essentially output music signal and be able to demonstrate whether a particular compression technique, I believe it was temporal noise spectral compression, was being used or not. And so there's a lot of different techniques that can be used that are not necessarily source code analysis that can show whether a patent claims are being infringed or not.
How often have you found a product does not infringe its patent in your reverse engineering work?
To tell you the truth, it tends to be more often than not you find that a product does not infringe a patent, and it's always a real struggle in this area because obviously the patent holder wants to be able to clearly demonstrate that that here's a product is infringing, but more often than not, as you get into the details of patent claims, you find that they're not infringing.
The next question is, have you failed to be able to reverse engineer a product?
Yes. The reverse engineering product is certainly can be very challenging. My son and I worked on a refrigeration controller system a couple of years ago. We were able to pull the firmware out, disassemble the code. We'd built special tools to be able to actually go in and insert our own debugging tools into an operating system and start doing analysis on the assembly code in there. But then we found, after a fair amount of work, that the code was obfuscated, which means a manufacturer can go through a process where they literally do almost like an encryption or a scrambling of the code, which makes it extremely difficult to follow the operation of the code. And so the customer kind of pulled the plug at that point in time because the amount of additional effort that it would take to do that, continue that reverse engineering.
And the last question for this section, should the testifying expert do the product reverse engineering?
Yeah, this is a question. I know it gets into a battle. I've talked with other experts that I've worked with. The primary advantage of the expert that's going to be testifying, doing his own reverse engineering, is you really learn all the details of how a product is operating. You're spending a great deal of time comparing that product's operation with the patent claims. So you're gaining a tremendous amount of knowledge and understanding, which makes it really difficult for the opposing side, especially once you get to cross-examination on the stand, to rattle you or surprise you with the product operation. You really end up with a great leg up on the opposing attorney, because there's no way rarely would they have the kind of level of experience with the product and depth of knowledge you're going to get by doing your own product reverse engineering.
Thank you, Dr. Direen. You can continue with the presentation.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Now we're kind of getting more from the product analysis, reverse engineering side to more of what my point of view and the experts' kind of point of view as we start getting into depositions and testimony side. Personally, I found that depositions can be tougher than a trial testimony. And I say this is because, in a deposition, it's a battle kind of head-to-head with the opposing attorney. There's no judge or jury to interact with. You don't really kind of get as in a trial, you get a time to kind of walk a jury through your view of how a product works in the direct exam. So you're not spending time getting that set up in preparation. You're basically kind of jumping in where the opposing attorney is just trying to rip apart small pieces of your arguments in as much of a way as he can to try to disorient you, I suppose you'd say. I think it's also somewhat of a challenge on depositions is knowing that, as an expert, you can't really win at this side. You basically can only lose or give up ground. So I found this to be a more challenging side. I enjoy it, but it's definitely very different than trial testimony. So you really want to make sure, from the attorney side going into a deposition with your expert, that you're spending a fair amount of time in preparation with the expert. The expert's going to be very familiar with the technology of the case, but you want to make sure that he's crystal clear on the technology as it's related to the patent claims and staying well within the claims and claim construction analysis and the reports that you've already worked your way through carefully with an expert. The expert has an advantage typically over the opposing attorney in that he's going to understand the technology better. Just because you're dealing with an expert that's worked in this field that the product relies in for years, and most patent attorneys, while being very technically savvy, haven't spent their careers developing products or working through details of the technology. So that's where I've found is where I've got the leg up as I go into a deposition, is on the technology side. I've also found I've got to be careful is because I've got the maybe leg up on the technology side, is not to end up trying to teach the opposing attorney the technology, but let him kind of dig his own holes and stick directly to the question at hand and limit the scope of my questions to or answers to getting his question answered, but without giving up any ground. The other thing I found that's extremely helpful is the opposing attorney is going to try to reword the language to trip you up. I found it very helpful, and you can help your expert going into a deposition and make sure that they stick to the claim language and the terminology used there. As engineers, we have a tendency to kind of want to, redefine language or be loose with our language. We haven't quite often, spent the time that you run into when you're kind of getting into a court case, as we can be more loose with our language in normal everyday use, but this is what really can trip us up in going through a deposition and in testimony and trial, is to make sure we stay very precisely to the claim language as we describe the product, and that will keep you out of trouble. So make sure your expert is very versed in the claim language and is describing things within the bounds of that claim language and doesn't kind of get drugged outside of that realm and get tripped up from that area. Okay. The other thing to work with your expert on are what are the weak points going into the deposition. Make sure you've spent time with your expert so they understand on the issues of the case, and you'll have some information that the experts quite often haven't been involved in. But make sure he understands what the key issues are, where there's being real challenges in the claim construction language, and make sure that you've got a clear plan for working around any of these issues, and that the expert can defend your position clearly. So that's kind of my piece, kind of going into depositions. Trial testimony. I had the privilege on my first case going into trial of, we held a mock trial in Connecticut, where the trial was being held in Hartford, Connecticut. And this is the first time I'd been through that process. Let's see, I've got one question that came in. Let me just jump on that before I go into this in detail. I've got 3 patents in my name that I'm an inventor on. I'm not exactly sure in terms of registration what you mean by have patents I have registered. It's basic, but I do have 3 patents that I'm an inventor on. In the mock trial, they brought in 30 people off the streets out of Hartford, Connecticut area, and it was for a 2-day process. The first day was literally running through the entire court case, which was expected to take on the order of 2 weeks of presentation material between the two sides in 1 day. So these mock jurors got the whole case blasted at them in a very short period of time. And I was kind of really skeptical of the process at that point in time. As we went into the second day in the mock trial process, we broke up the 30 people into 3 teams or 3 juries that then had to go through and deliberate the case and try to make decisions on the whether the product at hand infringed the patents and the various claims of the patents and a few other elements that came in that's part of an infringement case. And we got to watch the 3 different teams from behind 2-way mirrors and see that process. And I found that extremely instructive. One, I didn't really think that these teams would, take the case serious at all. And, you could see, as they kind of started off the day, that second day in the rooms, it's kind of joking around and kicking around. But it really, it surprised me. In each team, there became kind of a core element that, really sat down and started saying, what is the real issues of this case? What is it? How are we going to make a decision as to whether, this product is infringing, the claims of the patents? And, you could see them trying to dig in and understand the elements of the claim and how the product was operating relative to the patent claims. Now, at the end of the day, they ended up making really poor decisions, which was not surprising because basically they had got the whole case, the fire hose, really kind of poor process of the presentation, even though they were kind of given a lot of the material that I had put together to say, here's why I believe the product infringed. It wasn't delivered by me in some kind of a slow, methodical process. It was just, they're just blasted this information. But I was surprised at how hard they did struggle to try to understand how the product worked and how it worked relative to the claims. And this really brought the light on to me that the real audience, and I know as attorneys you understand this well, but as the expert, even though you're kind of told it, you don't really get, it doesn't really come across and sink in very well that the judge and jury are really your audience when you get to trial. Not the opposing attorney, which you're squaring off with. It's really the judge and jury that you're trying to make your case to. And once that came across clearly to me, I became, very comfortable because I kind of come back and said, well, I may get a little intimidated, fighting an attorney head on, but I can be very comfortable with the judge and jury. The jury, being a bunch of people off the streets, I can be very comfortable with that group. And as being a teacher in part of my career of teaching courses, I thoroughly enjoy taking complex subjects and trying to bring it down to something that a group of people off the streets can understand. It also became clear to me that the jury really fundamentally would like to make good decisions. And so the takeaway from that became, if I can get, as the expert in court, the material, the complex material of a product relative to a set of patent claims, if I can bring that down to their level and get that information across clearly so that they can clearly understand a product's operation within the bounds of a claim, then the jury has something that they can kind of go away with to make good decisions. So in this case, we spent a lot of time on the direct exam, carefully and methodically, with good diagrams, walking the jury through the technology of the patented invention. We wanted to very clearly show what the patent invention is, so they had a clear understanding of that and how to read and interpret the claims. I made a big point of saying, kind of telling the jury, that, and I kind of literally said to the jury, I said, patent claims are this horrible, awful, convoluted language that only a patent attorney's mother could be proud of. And most engineers, kind of look at patent claims and they feel the same way. It's not even they're off the streets. But, and here was the big but, there is a very good reason that patent claims are the way they are. They're defining the boundary or the fence around the invention. So it's a very specific language, legal language, used to define that boundary. And if you get that point across well, then the jury becomes they start to understand what that means. And my whole goal in that in that direct section of the direct exam was to get them to feel they could walk away that evening feeling extremely proud of themselves that they understood this complex invention, and even more so understood the claims of the patent and how they related to the invention. Once I was able to get that, we actually, in that particular case, were able to, the jury adjourned at the end of that day, which was, I literally kind of worked with my attorneys to try to get that set up so they could go away and sleep on that overnight and think about what the invention was and the patent claims and how it all fit together. Because then the next morning we picked back up and I was able to start explaining the accused product relative to the patent claims. It became very easy to say, here's the product, how it's operating within the bounds of this claim. Here's the next element of the product, it's operating within the bounds of the claim. We brought up, this very diagram here saying, a patent claims is describing this boundary. And so every step of the way of walking them through, how this product operated into each element of the claim, you're constantly bringing back to, that's how it's operating within the bounds of the claim. And a jury is not going to understand all the nuances and details of how a product operates. I mean, it's, the experts are kind of spending a tremendous amount of time with a product and fighting through this. But if you can get them to understand the key pieces of how a product is operating relative to the patent claims, and they get it, you're on solid grounds with them, and then they're starting to feel like when they get to a deliberation stage, they've got something that they can make decisions on. They say, I understand this piece of what's happening with the product. The better they understand that, they're building trust in you as an expert, and then where they miss details, they don't understand it, which they're going to, at least they've gotten back to say, I trust the expert in that he's told me the truth in how this product is operating relative to that. So I can't really kind of over push, getting that across clearly to the jury. In this particular trial, let's see, I think I've covered quite a few of these. In that, walking the jury through the product's operation relative to patent claim elements. Personally, as an expert, and I've taught before, I love kind of trying to take complex subjects, getting them back down to language that a jury can understand, demonstrating how products operating within the boundaries of claim. Once they kind of get that, they will be in. You've got them won over. Okay. Cross-exam. I was, in this first trial, kind of shocked that my comfort level, by the time we got to this part of the trial, my comfort level with the jury and the case, by that time, I was extremely comfortable and ready to kind of go into cross-exam, and I was on very solid ground. So it literally became fun for me to be on cross-exam. I've established a good rapport with the jury and the judge. They trust me with what we're doing. It literally found out after the trial, because it ended. They settled before we even finished all my testimony in the stand, and it found out the opposing attorney, who had had a lot of experience, became cautious about how he approached me in front of the jury, because I had established such a good rapport with him. The other key thing is, I found, and I think we're going to run out of time, so I'm going to have to jump through this. I found, don't give an attorney, an inch on his hypotheticals. If there's any piece that I can nail and stop him dead on his hypotheticals, I won't let him go anywhere in that, just because, once I've kind of give in to some piece of his hypotheticals, I'm going to get drugged down a dark alley and be beaten up. And also don't give the opposing side an inch on their attempting to change the claim language or restate it, where they're kind of moving the boundaries of the fence. So we're, by the looks of it, my clock, we're running out of time very fast, so I'm going to allow us to jump into question and answers. Let's see if anything that's come out from the audience. I'd love to hear from you.
Sure. If all of the attendees can type in the passcode. And our first question, can you give an example of a product you reversed?
That I reverse engineered? Well, certainly the flow meter was one. I did a lot of compression algorithms with modem technology, and so those. It's been kind of quite a wide range of products I've reverse engineered.
Next question, how do you bring a complex subject down to the street level?
Well, it's always a challenge, but I found people who understand a technology the best and I've always kind of used it as a example. If the only way they can explain it is in complex terms, I kind of wonder how well they really do understand it. So it is a skill set to be able to say, how do I develop reasonable analogies that say to what people understand and bring that back to how a product is operating or the technology, specific technology.
Next question, should the expert help develop the trial presentation material?
Absolutely. Basically, the expert's going to be using that trial presentation material to get his points across. He needs to be very familiar with it, and that trial presentation material needs to be complementing and bringing out the points he's going to make in trial.
Okay. And our last question, when is it helpful to bring an expert to assist an attorney in the deposition of an opposing expert?
Well, this is where your expert is the one that is going to understand the technology of the invention, the material that you're working with. So if you're going up against another expert in a deposition, it's very helpful to have your expert on the side kind of watching for kind of the BS factor coming out of them and helping you guide some of the questions of the opposing expert and and trying to draw out where the weaknesses are in their arguments.
Okay, this concludes our questions for today. In addition to being your best source for testifying and consulting experts for the past 60 years, TASA also offers e-discovery and forensic solutions, free interactive webinars, cybersecurity services, day-in-the-life videos, research reports on expert witnesses, which includes the Challenge History Report 2.0, Preliminary Screening Report, and Expert Profile 360. I want to take the opportunity to thank everyone for attending, and most especially Dr. Harry Direen for his time and expertise. If you would like to speak with Dr. Direen or anyone you would like to speak with a TASA representative regarding an expert witness for a case that you are working on, please contact TASA at 1-800-523-2319. One of my colleagues will be following up with you regarding your feedback on today's presentation. This concludes our program for today.